One of the things that piqued my interest last time was mitochondrial DNA. The only thing I know back from school was it's the powerhouse of the cell.
I'd realized maternal lines were very important, but I didn't know why. When he explained to me why, it just made so much sense to me.
From what I understand, it's always passed down from the maternal line.
Your mitochondrial line comes from the female side, the dam or the mother.
Let's define what is an anchor doe, like in depth.
An anchor doe, so essentially it's anchoring the maternal line in my mind. First thing I'm gonna look for is who is the anchor.
What else should people be looking for or be just even considering?
The very top of my list is survivability.
Dead deer ain't worth nothing.
If you will focus on that bottom line, your production is gonna be much better.
If someone only remembers one thing from this conversation, what should it be?
I think to effectively map maternal lines, in your breeding strategy.
Before we get into today's episode, we'd really appreciate it if you take a second to like, subscribe, and share the podcast. Right now, only about 40% of the viewers are subscribed, and it's completely free. Every bit of support helps us continue bringing on great guests, sharing important conversations, and educating more people about this industry. Now, let's get into today's episode. Everyone, welcome back to the Droptine Studios Podcast. Today, we have Chris Methner of Blessed Bayou back on the podcast again. If you want to hear more of what we've talked about last time, you can go back to episode number 6, one of the OGs on the podcast originally. So, Chris, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm excited.
Yes, sir. So, one of the things that piqued my interest last time we talked, we just kind of briefly went over it, was mitochondrial DNA. And so, we made a post about it. Some people didn't know what it was. The only thing I know back from school was it's the powerhouse of the cell. So if you could kind of explain what mitochondrial DNA is, and I'm an idiot, so I need you to kind of like break it down for me like I'm a 10-year-old.
Yeah, well, I'm no specialist either. I mean, I'm no geneticist. I started early in the breeding industry and studied it for a long time, and especially, as you know, when I started doing auctions, I had to study it even deeper. But about 10 years ago, I'd realized that maternal lines. Before that, I'd realized maternal lines were very important, but I didn't know why. And I was at Diamond M Ranch, and Richard Miller, I don't know if you know him, but he's been breeding deer for a long time. He's real intelligent about breeding. He probably knows more about Birdall or Lone Hollow's line than anybody I know. He's got the old notes that they used to keep, and man, he's got it going on. And he explained it to me, and I was like, and it just lit off in my head. I knew there was a great significance there, but I didn't know why. And when he explained to me why, it just made so much sense to me. And so we'll try to break it down as far as my knowledge can, but essentially your body, every living tissue within your body is made up of cells, right? And so within that cell, you have a nucleus and you have nuclear DNA. And that's what most people think of as DNA. Like 99% of your genetic makeup is nuclear DNA. And then you have within that cell mitochondria. And inside mitochondria, you have mitochondrial DNA. And they are responsible for producing energy for cellular growth, right? And many other things too. And we'll go back to this, but I do want to mention it now. They're also responsible for storing calcium within cells, which obviously, as you look at antlers, that can play a big role, right? But being that they convert nutrition into energy that pushes cellular growth. Right. And so that is a breeding aspect. That's something you need to understand. Cellular growth is driven by the energy produced by mitochondrial DNA. And the stronger the mitochondrial line, the more intense that conversion and that growth is. So,
and I guess that's where I've heard. So I try to do a little research on any podcast we do, but I've sent you one that I watched, and there's not really deer breeders or any kind of breeder mitochondrial DNA videos. So I feel like I was in science class again watching these videos. But from what I understand, it seems there's always the one-off, but from what they were saying is it's always passed down from the fraternal line.
The maternal,
maternal line. And so from there, Is that why? Because the rumor I heard growing up was the female in the breeding program is like 60% of the genetics. Is there a way to like a stat or anything to prove that statistic, or is that true?
Yeah, I don't know that. I don't know an exact percentage, but I do know it's incredibly significant. And
so it's not like 50-50.
No, because of that mitochondrial, like you said.
Right.
So going back to nuclear DNA, that's 99% of your genetic makeup's nuclear DNA, right? And then you have this piece of mitochondrial DNA. It's much smaller, but it's so impactful because of what it does, cellular growth. And so it has a huge role, no doubt. And it goes as cellular energy is produced, right? And as you start studying which lines are the strongest maternally, then you can see where that develops into many different things that improve a whitetail deer, but most certainly antler growth.
Right.
And as we went over the last podcast, you can narrow most of these deer lines. As you study deer lines, whitetail deer lines, there's so much paperwork on them now, pedigree wise, that as you study them, you can really define who has the strong maternal lines and why, because there's so much production out of them. Like we said, not over 90% of the breeder bucks in most scenarios go down to just a handful of does and their daughters, granddaughters, and great granddaughters. And so mitochondrially, as that's passed, so you're right. So males and females carry mitochondrial DNA. A male cannot pass it along because as the sperm fertilizes the egg, the male's mitochondria just becomes destroyed.
Right.
And so your mitochondrial line comes from the female side, the dam or the mother, right? And as that goes along, it doesn't lose relation. So a direct daughter, the way I understand it, like I said, I'm no geneticist, but the way I understand it, a direct daughter of an anchor doe, which we can go into that, like it's such a confusing term, right? Everybody says anchor does, and you don't, it's all over the board where that anchor doe is. But an anchor doe, one of the oldest does in that maternal line that you can identify, is kind of how I identify that. Like, for example, Tasha. Most people say, well, she's anchored to Tasha. Well, if you go a little further back, there's Green 72. And Green 72 was bad too, and so like, you don't remember King George with those animals, a daughter out of Green 72, produced him and many others, and so it goes all the way back to Green 72. And that, in my mind, is more usually how I identify it is the furthest animal on the female line that I can identify. And that's what I consider the anchor, right? But it all comes down to that bottom line.
Right.
When you're talking about mitochondrial DNA.
Yeah, because that was going to be one of my questions is like, how far back in a pedigree do you need to look to identify a anchor doe? Or let's do that first. Let's define what is an anchor doe, in depth. Yeah.
So an anchor doe, essentially it's anchoring the maternal line in my mind, right? And we know how powerful that maternal line is. It's responsible for cellular growth. So an anchor doe, when you look at a pedigree, you go to the very bottom line, and as far back as you can get, that's usually as far back as DNA'd or identified. That's usually what I consider the anchor, and that's why where, like I said, you have Tasha as an example. Well, in my mind, really, Green 72 is that anchor doe. But you'll hear different terms. It can move up the pedigree. It's a very loosely used term, and I don't know that there's a real definition to it. It's just how I view it. I usually try to go back as far as I possibly can because there's a lot of significance behind it. But you can really identify how powerful that maternal line is by looking at that furthest back animal on the bottom line of the pedigree and her daughters, granddaughters, great-granddaughters, and how much production comes out of them. And is it consistent, right? And usually in the whitetail breeding industry, it is very easy to see. And like if a customer hires me to do their breeding strategy and they bought 100 head of does from you, and I don't know your doe line, I don't know your deer line, first thing I'm going to do to break your herd down is I'm going to go look up every breeder book you have, and I'm going to figure out what's the common maternal lines that produce those breeder bucks, because the does I choose are going back to those maternal lines, because it's plain as day when you start studying it. And as you start looking at why, well, let's think about this. All right. So if it's responsible for converting nutrition, mitochondrial DNA is responsible for converting nutrition into energy, into cellular growth. Well, antlers during the velvet stage, to my knowledge, that's the fastest growing tissue known to man, right? That's cellular growth on steroids, it's or the primest example of cellular growth.
Right.
And so you can see why, if that cellular growth is really, really strong, you can see why, because of that maternal line, why it affects production so much. Right. Or fertility, more cells, more sperm cells, or, and so there's, it all comes back to converting nutrition to energy to cellular growth in my mind. And when you bring it back to that basic, it's responsible for that. And you can definitely tell there are lines that are much stronger than other. And so as we start breeding, you really, in my mind, should be trait breeding above that bottom line. Right. And so like when I make a breeding plan, I have about 15 traits I actually write down or have written down. So I keep myself on track, because it's so easy to chase a market or get off track. And I try to check as many of those traits as possible when I make a breeding decision or pick a sire. But let's say Blackjack, probably the best buck that's ever been produced, aesthetically, right? Incredibly wide, really long tines, a ton of up tines. Well, if I breed Blackjack to a doe, if my mitochondrial line, my maternal line is really, really strong, I feel like, to my knowledge, is how I view it, I'm going to get the most out of his traits in that breeding. If my mitochondrial line or my maternal line is weak, well, I'm not going to see his full potential in that breeding, because I don't have that strong of a cellular growth, Right. And so that's kind of how I view it. And like I said, I'm no geneticist, but that's just how I interpret it.
Right. And that's going to be another thing, is what all traits should people be looking for? Because we can't necessarily see on the nuclear level of someone's DNA or their mitochondrial DNA. We can't physically see that. So we've talked about antler growth, but that's another thing. Has anyone studied, or maybe because sometimes you'll hear, hey, this doe, we flushed her and she gave us 30 embryos. And you're like, oh my gosh, is that normal? And then you get someone else and like, we didn't get any, or we got one. Yeah. Or, hey, this sperm count, this buck, like before we sold, I had a yearling buck that gave me 78 straws packed at 120 mil a piece. And I was like, that's a lot. Yep. But then I'll hear other people, it's like, hey, this 4-year-old buck, he gave us 10 straws. Now, I know there's 100 different things that could go wrong. They could urinate during it. They could have just bred. There's a million things that could go wrong. Do you think those are types of traits that all break down and tie back to mitochondrial DNA? Yeah, I think to a certain extent, yes. Yeah. Like horsepower was one of them. He was incredibly fertile in his, back in a few years back, everybody, or not everybody, but a lot of times if you're doing embryo transfer or you were AIing, sometimes guys would split trying to get the best of both worlds, especially ET. You would AI with 2 different sires and try to get embryos from both. And it seemed like his sperm were they were the strongest. And and so I think, when you think about mitochondrial lines, in my mind, that makes sense. Yes, I bet you that affects it greatly, because you're converting nutrition at a higher level and you're having better cellular growth, in which, in my mind, would produce more sperm cells, healthier sperm cells. Right. And so I think there's probably a really strong tie to maternal lines or mitochondrial DNA and fertility. Right. Yeah. So when I was thinking about these questions, so the obvious ones, we say the same thing, right? Like most people like looking at bucks because they have antlers on their head. Yep. But then other people, but we say there's no sex appeal to a doe, but those are we're saying the most important, or not most, but very important. Very important. Yep. But now what other traits are there? We talked about semen, embryos, or just eggs in general, producing antlers. Things that came to my mind that I hear and talk about people often, either body condition, fawn survivability. What else should people be looking for or be just even considering?
Yep. The very top of my list, and I think every breeder, it should be at the top of their list because it's so important, is survivability.
Dead deer ain't worth nothing.
No. And if you're really trying to produce a line of animals or a group of animals that has, the greatest genetic impact it can possibly have on another breeder or a piece of property, they have to live, and you need to be offering your customers, if they're utilizing your animals to stock their ranch, it needs to improve that ranch, right? Like that's the only way this works. And so, back when the Texas market was so nuts, that got overlooked greatly in my mind because you were chasing these markets and these things that were bringing big money or good money. But a lot of people forgot about survivability, right. and so there are definite lines that if deer in Texas or other states in the United States that are more hardy than others. And like you look at Hatata's line that went back to Circle J and B, Chris Timmons bred a really tough line of deer and brought in Hatata. Hatata's done a really, really good job with it. And now they're probably one of the more sought after groups in the state because they stuck to that. Their 100%. Deer live. I've used them a lot on ranches, and another one is Geist White Ghost.
Yeah.
His line is tough, man. They're just tough animals. And you feel real comfortable as a biologist stocking your customers' ranches with animals like that, because last thing you want to happen is release 20 does and 12 of them die or 15 of them die. And that's not good for the industry. It's not, it's not good for the goal you're trying to do, be the very best you can be at that specific job or implementation. They have to live. And so survivability to me is one of the most important traits, and it's at the very, very top. And then there's other things, like you said, fertility and all these things, but I go into inside spread, time length, and what I want to produce. And the other thing I think that's important to understand, it's a little different now, but a few years ago when the market was bigger, the whitetail market was larger. There's different niches within the market. Still is.
Right.
Even it's primarily in Texas. It's a ranch stocking market at this point, right? Nobody's trading breeder to breeder hardly, unless it's semen or embryos, because of the risks of regulations, right? But even at that, there's still niches within that, right? Like, and so I think it's really important to identify what niches you want to go after and form that breeding strategy. That's generally what I do is if I was going to, consult for a customer and especially when the market was really rolling, I would dedicate a percentage of those animals to that very high end market. Right. And then, I may dedicate some to just a pure typical high percentage Texas, hardy as can be animal, but identifying niches I think is really, really important.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Cause you're 100% right, because if your number one trait is survivability, none of the traits matter underneath it if they're dead.
Yep.
And so you can say, well, this one is more important to me. Well, if they don't live,
it doesn't matter.
That trait doesn't matter.
And generally you sacrifice some antler growth or early breakout age. There's some traits you may sacrifice in Texas by putting survivability at the top, but in my opinion, it has to be there. Yeah. There's no question.
Yeah. So the two things that I'll go into, but before we move on to the next part, I want to ask, do you think like stress level is, I don't know if that's tied to mitochondrial DNA, because sometimes you'll just be like, oh, well, her mama was crazy. And because anywhere we go, there's always that one doe in that pen that just is running around nonstop.
Yeah.
So is that more of technically it would be genetic either way, but do you think that ties into the mitochondrial DNA, or is that just something passed down?
Yeah, I think mitochondrial DNA could affect that. Yes, absolutely. I think it's probably nuclear genetic. I think mitochondrial DNA could affect that, and then behavior. Right. What it's what his mother does, but I think there's certainly a genetic component that you do see, like there were certain sires that they were always a nervous animal, and their offspring a lot of times were too. I mean, you could see it passing down.
Right.
And going back to trait breeding, you were talking about, there's no genome sequencing as far as identifying traits like, this marker produces inside spread. Right. But what is really refreshing when you're picking sires to breed is, all right, so what traits do they have first off, right? What are they expressing trait wise? But can you map that out without looking into what its actual genetics are, beyond a pedigree, right? So Can you say, okay, well, Monarch 1, for example, out of Robert Williams herd.
Love that deer.
Yeah, wide deer, produced really, really good. Well, his sire was Longhorn. Well, Longhorn was wide as could be. And his dam was Red 55, a very, very strong maternal line within that line of deer. But, she had some other sons that had nice frames on them, that weren't as wide, but, and so you could kind of see why he looked the way he looked. And that's always refreshing to me, especially if it's a younger animal that you haven't seen a ton of production out of yet. I mean, obviously that's probably your number one tool to judge a sire from is production, right? But it always, I think it's important if you have the ability to kind of map that out and understand why. If you can look at a pedigree and understand why an animal looks the way it looks, then I feel like, obviously just from a common sense standpoint, you probably have a better potential of pushing those traits forward, the traits that you want. You know? And you put that above a really strong mitochondrial line. Right. Then you're going to see the full potential of those traits, or a higher potential of those traits.
Well, and that's what I always told people before I bought into deer, which I'm going to counterpredict myself by saying this, but anytime that I had a client come to me and saying, hey, we either want to stock a ranch, put something in our pens, or what should we do? We met this new guy that has Robert Williams genetics or John Chu's genetics, which are kind of the same ranch pretty much, but like they go through and it's like, at what point do you go to the people that just have only been breeding a year? Now, yes, they have new does, they've got all this, but I always told them, go with what's predictable. Just go to the source, go to Robert Williams. Like go to John True, go to Heath Yower, the people that have been doing it for 25 years. You like their genetics off of these new breeders. And like, I'm not trying to say don't buy from new breeders. That's why I said I was going to kind of predict myself. But like, to me, anything that is predictable is worth twice as much money. If you're going to be able to buy a doe that she's going to produce, if you buy a buck like we were talking about, and that's what I'm hoping we can do with these podcasts, is ask these questions of like, some people just don't know what to ask, but like when you break it down and you talk about the calcium and the DNA and all these other stuff, and it's like, that actually makes sense. Yeah. And so, yeah, I don't really know where I was going on that tangent, but as far as that is like, when you're going through that and you're finding lines for clients, I know every ranch's potential is going to be different, or what their goals are. But is that how you viewed it? Since on mitochondrial DNA, you find the anchor doe, you go back there. Are you looking for someone that has, for like your clients, you're going, I need to find someone who's selling deer with this. So like, who was the OG of that line? Is that how you go about looking for, like going to the source rather than someone who bought the source who now has part of the source, or how do you make that decision?
It doesn't matter to me as far as who has it, but it does have to have that maternal line, right? Okay. Like that's the first thing I'm going to look for is who is the anchor. And that's the very first thing I'm going to look for. And if you watch one of the auctions that I'm calling, you'll hear me say maternal line hundreds of times. Right. Because I think that's incredibly important to understand when you're buying females. Right. And so like your line of deer, most of that went back to Lance Birdall, which that's another line that's incredibly hardy. And he's done a phenomenal job breeding, and a ton of CWD genetic resistance in that line too. But it's a phenomenal line. He's got some anchors that are just, they're killers, man. And they're all over, they before they closed the borders in Florida, a bunch of them got down there and you go look at Florida, and a lot of those anchor to the, some of that stuff, and it's some of the strongest stuff in the state. Lance has done a really good job.
Absolutely.
Hal was his uncle, Bertall, and that line ended up producing Gladiator and then Lone Hollow,
right.
And so they're all very closely related animals.
Yeah.
And you get in, like them and Hatata are really good examples. You hear a lot of arguing over line breeding, like when I was younger, studying this stuff, that's what you did. You line bred really, really deep, and then you outcrossed. And to take advantage of hybrid vigor, which is the ability to outproduce the parents, right? And there's a lot to that, I believe. I do it in fish. But so I think there's a lot of people now that really kind of frown upon line breeding, and I think there's really good reasons why, because you're breeding the bad also in, right? Like you can't, if you're not doing a really, really good job of picking it, or there's just a lot of unknowns. We're all estimating at this at best. But there are lines like your old line, that Lance has that, man, it's bred incredibly deep, but it's still just hardy as could be. And Hatata, they did some outcrossing, but theirs is bred very deep and it's still very hardy, and so, boy, that has to make those guys feel really good. To me, that means that line is a really good line.
Well, and
you're talking about survivability.
Yes. And so the two things I'll say on that is, one, we always joke around we say joke, but it's the truth is, well, when is it line breeding and inbreeding?
Yeah.
When it works and when it doesn't work.
Yeah, no doubt.
That's pretty much the fine line between it.
Yep.
But two, it's like I go to people like, we keep picking on Hatata, and I look at it, I'm like, man, like y'all must be proud. Like this is phenomenal. And they're so hard on themselves. Like, well, we could do this better. We could go in this direction or whatever. And I'm like, y'all need to go visit other places, because what y'all are doing is pretty phenomenal.
Yeah.
And I just think that, which is good. I think that's how you always continue to get better, is always wanting to take that next step.
Well, yeah, Doug made them as competitive as possible.
Absolutely.
Those two brothers, yeah. So
don't go play golf with them. They get mean.
Yeah, I can't imagine. Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I'll just shake their hand.
Right.
Yeah. But I think that Catlin probably got a really good view of the importance of that line. He went to Nadifa this year and probably was really surprised about the number of Amish that really admired that group of deer. And they used it up there. They use it up there.
I was going to tell them, I told them, if you go, like, you need to go. Like, people, you will sell semen, you will do this, but these guys want to talk to you face to face.
Yeah. And
especially since the Amish don't have, like, social media, or they're not looking at their websites, like, you need to be face to face.
And they have phenomenal deer.
Yes.
I mean, you're talking about outcross, the Hatata line outcrossing to some of that northern stuff. And there's, when you get up north, Pine Creek has they're a really clean line up north. I always thought, man, if they crossed the Hatata's bucks, it would just make the coolest animals ever.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of guys up there that are doing that strategy. You know, or a few.
Yeah. So hopefully we'll be able to see some of that, because I think that would be really cool, since like with Chris Timmons to Hatata, and now with Catlin being able to look, they kind of, until the industry needed it, right? Like you said, I feel like for about 5 to 8 years, the industry kind of forgot about survivability, bringing in whatever genetics, I'll say more northern genetics, and outcrossing it, and they just weren't surviving in our heat and everything else. But I think people overlook that. And then now, even some people, they'll have 2-year-olds with 400 inches on their head, and they're like, we need to go back to Hatata genetics, because even though they're beautiful deer, they're not as big as the industry standard is. But sometimes a deer still needs to look like a deer.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think that's why they're a perfect outcross. They're helping bring some genetics down that kind of got a little far out of hand. And so it's not only from a genetic standpoint, but it's also from a visual standpoint that I think they're helping the industry tremendously.
Yeah, no doubt. I think you're right. I think no matter if you're chasing inches, you still have to have like the core traits that I breed for, that I write down. I still want that within that animal.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I want frame. I mean, like you said, I want something that looks good.
Yeah. So one of the things I want to ask about with mitochondrial DNA and passing down traits, does the mitochondrial DNA tie into resistance? So like with CWD markers, has there been any provenance to that? Like, has there been anything that we can tie back or prove on that this. Obviously, the markers hand down. Does the mitochondrial DNA have anything to do with that?
I bet it does. I don't, to my knowledge, there's nothing proven or definitive, but it'd be a really good question for Seabury. You know, I bet he has a really good idea on it, especially as much as he looked at and his how in depth his knowledge is on genetics. But if I had to guess, absolutely, I bet you could link mitochondrial lines with CWD resistance. It just makes sense to me. If your cells process nutrition better, you've got, in my mind, you've got to be a more hardy animal,
right?
You know, or it makes sense that you possibly are a more hardy animal. It just makes sense to me.
Yeah, we'll have to send Chris a snippet and try to get him and maybe Chris Seabury, Chris Methner, and Macy Ledbetter and myself. I can't even believe I put myself in that category with y'all. But
that would be great.
I think that'd be a really good podcast. And just picking and poking and asking questions and.
Yeah, it'd be fun. Yeah, that would be a 4-hour plus.
Yeah, we'd have to take subscriptions for that when people would pay to hear it.
We need lunch,
So with the DNA traits, I kind of want to tie this in. So I want to ask, we talked about Tasha, and so now that we have so much DNA traits with whitetail, what are some of those other standout females in the whitetail industry? Because I want to preface this too. If anyone's ever been to any auction that Chris is emceeing or hosting or whatever it is, like, you do your homework. And so not only from a wildlife biologist standpoint, but like when you're doing any of the auctions, if we've talked about it, you spend hours, you call the people that are putting lots in, and you look online and you do your homework. So anyone listening, when I'm asking Chris this question, I genuinely mean this, that you are one of the only people I know that is actively every single year diving into this. Most people will study it once, but you're studying this at every single auction. And so I'm really curious, and I appreciate you sharing your knowledge on these does and why. But I just wanted to preface that. But what other doe lines or what other specific females in the whitetail industry are standout? Since 1967, the Exotic Wildlife Association has supported conservation, advocacy, and education for the exotic wildlife industry. EWA brings together ranchers, breeders, conservationists, hunters, and wildlife professionals who are working to protect the exotic wildlife and preserve the industry for the next generation. EWA members receive access to valuable resources, legislative support, networking, education, and of course the EWA registry. Learn more or become a member today at myewa.org and follow the Exotic Wildlife Association on Facebook. Spring Creek Outdoors is an all-inclusive habitat and wildlife management company that includes exotic and native animals, fisheries, lake designs, construction, wildlife surveys, including helicopters and thermal drones, wildlife captures, state-issued permits, and wildlife tax conversions all over Texas. They have seen what works and what doesn't work on hundreds of ranches and literally millions of acres. No matter what your management goals are, the team at Spring Creek Outdoors can help you reach them. So find more information at springcreekoutdoors.com.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. I think it was always, for me, I always had a fear of public speaking, first off, you know, like I did, definitely. And I would make myself do it. But when I first started doing those auctions, Tim Condit was still the executive director of DBC, and he asked me one day, Nathan Ross was doing them for him, and Nathan was doing a great job, but Nathan couldn't be at the next auction, and so Tim asked me to do it. I'm like, man, I was nervous, and so that's what really drove me. I make notes, you know, but I just read. I don't do anything special freelancing up there. It's primarily reading the notes I created, and over time, then you knew a lot of it in the first place because that's what you do for a living, right? But over time, you even get better at it and things, and so as you know, something, if there's a known maternal line, then I definitely want the buyers to understand that, and I want them to understand how powerful that is, because to me, that's the very first thing you need to understand, right? And so there are many, but if you go to Lone Hollow's line, like I was telling you, Richard Miller earlier was kind of one that explained how mitochondrial DNA worked to me first, but he had all these notes. I guess Birdall had them. I don't know. I guess Bertall did have them, but there were all these notes before DNA, but they mapped everything out. And you always heard there was a doe named Bertall number 2 and Bertall number 10 were both really strong does. Well, they are now they're in DNA, their tag numbers changed. It's pink 22 and pink 20. And to me, they have the same, they're twins, right? And so, that's one maternal line in the state of Texas that I believe is absolutely one of the strongest in the nation. There's a tremendous amount of breeder bucks produced out of that. Like it used to when I did those auctions, when one of those was anchored to them, I would try to list like the top 10, you know, and I mean, there's probably 50 plus really good breeders, you know, that out of that and maybe more. But you start listing them. I mean, it's just boom, 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 you know, and so that's one that is those two sisters. Pink 22 has more production, but I think she has more offspring, more daughters, right? And so her daughters, granddaughters, and them, like we talked about, the relation mitochondrially does not. You don't lose relation from great granddaughter to mother, right? It's as strong all throughout, and it's been described. I was doing a presentation about this years ago in Florida, and Wally Danos was in the crowd, and he raised his hand and he said, "There's bicycle chains and there's ship chains." He said, "Mitochondrial DNA is a ship chain. You can't hardly break it." You know, now there are mutations, but it's a really strong chain, right? Yeah. And so going back to them, Pink 20 is very strong. There's just not near as much. She was doe number 10, and Pink 22 was doe number 2, and both of them are crazy strong.
Man,
yep. And then like when I started doing the top 30 North, I had to really dive into Pine Creek, and then there's a really probably the most defined maternal line, to my knowledge, up north with John Irvin Stolfus. He has Rocky Ridge whitetails, and he has a doe named Heather, and she is just unbelievably strong. And the number of breeder bucks that go to her daughters, granddaughters, great granddaughters is astronomical. She is absolutely, in my mind, one of the strongest maternal lines in the nation. And then, you know, like she even branches over to Woodard in Kentucky, which I saw Dustin Blosser had commented on when you asked about questions, right? He runs Woodard's. They have a doe named Bonnie, and they always told me that where she came from, she was probably a 3/4 sister to Heather, and Bonnie's really, really strong too. And I'm assuming that that's on the bottom side, you know, part of that relation. Because she relates to, her production at over there on their farm has just been phenomenal.
So I think that's what, excuse me. So I've heard people that will do their homework, right? Like I said, there's only a handful of people that I personally know. Everyone studies pedigrees, but there's guys I know that they'll dive into, like you're saying, they'll go study another farm or ranch's pedigrees. They'll go find that, like whatever you said earlier, it was, you know, let's just say doe name, but her mom was Green 22. Well, then when you go to Green 22 and you find out her lines and who has babies out of them, and I've seen it in fallow and specifically whitetail, is they'll go to a farm tour and they'll be like, "Yeah, what do you got for sale? What do you got this?" And they're like, "Well, who's this doe?" And they just are using it and they're like, "Man, I would really like to have her. I like that pedigree." But in their mind, they've already done their homework. Yeah. They know what that mom has done. They know what that granddam has done. They know everything. Yeah. And it's funny, and that'll tie into some of my questions later, but I just think that so many people don't know the questions to ask. They very much just only look at antlers on bucks' heads and go, that worked or it didn't work. And I don't know. I just feel like there's so much more to do than just give a buck and a female what God designed to do. And you can go, well, God also designed the mitochondrial DNA, and he also designed how these are going to, you know, trait down. But yeah, I think it's very, very important for people to do their homework. I just don't think people know what questions to ask. Yeah. It's tough. I mean, after you do it for a long time, it seems simple to you, you know, as far as breaking that down. But man, I can remember coming in, it's just overwhelming.
And I mean, I think the easiest thing to do in my mind is to go find the bucks the antlers you like the best, whatever species it is, and start studying what produced that.
Right.
All the way through, but dang sure study that bottom line and figure out what females produce that, or multiples, or however. The more you can define, the better. But I assure you, if you will focus on that bottom line and identify where these awesome bucks, where they go back to on the very bottom line of that pedigree, and if you can make decisions on common females, maternal lines, your production is going to be much better. Because like I said, to my knowledge, that's how you see the full genetic potential out of what you're breeding to your female.
Right.
And it is, like I said, it's so well defined in whitetail. It's just obvious. It just is if you look at it.
So how does someone, when you're saying doing their homework, I want to make sure I ask overly, not only for myself, but for the listeners, is how are you studying that bottom line? Is it using like NADAR? And then once you find this buck you like, just pick any buck, how are you, quote unquote, studying the bottom line? Because some people may not know. There's so many new people in the industry going, well, I don't know what pink 17 is, or I don't know how to find out who owns green 12.
Yeah.
So how do they study that bottom line?
Yeah. So like I don't know much about the fallow market, right? Like if I had to go in and start putting breeding strategies together with the fallow market, I would, like I told you, I would go find the best sires out there and see if I can identify maternal lines that produced them. Right. And so once you identify, if you're breaking down a line of deer and you identify these common females and their daughters, granddaughters, and great granddaughters that are producing all these, like a high percentage of the sires, it's pretty definitive. And so at that point, so you're studying, right? Like you're saying, okay, these sires are the best sires in this herd. They all go back on the very bottom line of that pedigree. They all go back to white 10 or whoever, right? Or 60% of them go back to white 10. Then I'm going to try to purchase females that go back to white 10 on the very bottom line. Because then I know I have her mitochondrial DNA in my females, right? Right. And I feel like that improves your odds of producing larger antlered animals tremendously. Right. Does that make sense? Is that answering it? Or
yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
trying to. I mean, that's how I study it, you know, and it doesn't matter what it's in or what animal. I think it's important in any breeding strategy. I was doing a talk at a presentation at EWA, I think 2 years ago or something. Anyways, it was over fisheries, and it was how to produce trophy bass, and I started it all the way from fry. Like you have to make sure these animals' nutrition is available from front to end as far as their life cycle goes, right? If not, you're lowering the overall potential of that animal in a bass.
Kind of like stunting their growth.
Yeah, you're not going to hit their full potential. Like if I have a fry that doesn't have enough zooplankton to hit that next stage, I've lost a little time on the full potential growth, right? And eventually I got into maternal lines, not that they're defined, but trying to implement that into bass. And when I got done, there was a guy, he was a professor at the University of Georgia. And he came up and he was pretty well versed and much more intelligent in mitochondrial DNA than I am. And he was explaining to me, even in plants, and I think we may have talked about it, but even in plants, it's definitive, you know? So it's, to me, it crosses all animals.
I was going to say quite literally anything that has to go down from whether it's seedling or offspring or whatever, you're going to have some type of father and mother. Yeah. And that mother passing that down. I'd be curious too, to learn like what all part of plants does that, you know, what traits can you get from plants? But it's also the same thing as if you just took a layman's person out of like California, you know, I don't know, pick any other state that doesn't have deer breeding. They'd be like, you breed deer? Yeah. And they probably think, just put a male and a female together and you're breeding deer. It's like, well, kind of, but there's so much more that can go into it. Absolutely. But I'm sure all that to say is if you find I don't even know what you call a plant person. There's arborists, but that's trees. But like, right. I'm sure there's different veins, and I don't even know what all plants can or can't do.
Yeah, I'm sure it is incredibly depth, especially with crop.
Right.
I bet they have it mapped, similar to the cattle industry.
Oh, for sure.
Like there's predictability at that point, right? Like sure enough, math predictability.
Oh, for sure.
So that's pretty fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
It really is. Yeah.
So I know we discussed that males can't really pass down mitochondrial DNA, but can a great male still produce inconsistent offspring if it has a female, a strong bottom side? If
it's bred to a strong bottom side?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's just your nuclear DNA, which is 99% of your genetic makeup, it's obviously a huge part of that, right? Like what you produce trait wise. I think it's the maternal line there, the mitochondrial DNA is going to, the stronger it is, it's going to show you the full potential of that sire. And so that sire can most certainly be inconsistent with what traits they can push forward that you want.
Right.
Yeah. And there's so much genetic diversity too. I mean, a whitetail deer has 70 chromosomes, and so there's 34 pairs and then a sex pair. And so think about all the different matches. You get one side from your mother and you get or the sire, one side from the dam, and think about all the different makeups that can happen in 34 different matchups, and so I think that's why line breeding really took off. They're trying to better define that, but of course there's good and bad that can come with that.
And I was going to say, it's because you can even have twin buck fawns. One of them can be typical as can be, and one can be like a tumbleweed.
Yeah.
But then also that tumbleweed can produce cleaner bucks than the typical one.
Yeah.
It's so like, I don't know, you'd think it would be 1 + 1 = 2, but it's really 34 times 27 to the nth power of how many variations you can have.
Yeah. And you look at, if you study some of the whitetail deer lines, like you look at Pine Creek, for example, they bred typicals for a very, very long time and did a really good job of it. And they go back to a really strong maternal line. It's the Patrick line of does, which I didn't know anything about until I had to begin studying it. And there's 3 of them. There's 111, Patrick 111, or 110, 111, and 112. And all 3 of them are like just unbelievably strong, and the amount of production that comes out of them and their offspring is phenomenal. But it seems to me, when you have, and Hatata's the same way, when you have a really strong, clean line like that was bred very well, you start outcrossing. Like I saw them outcross to some stuff that was not as clean, but it still produced a really big, beautiful frame. Like it was very powerful, how those traits translated, right? Because I think it was bred deep that way. And it was really tight. You were taking advantage of some hybrid vigor, but you were taking advantage of years of trait breeding, very good trait breeding that made the offspring way more consistent. Right. And if you're I believe if you're kind of breeding it in a way where you're like, man, you're kind of all over the board trait wise, that's when you're probably going to run into more inconsistent traits being produced out of your production. Right. Just because there's so many different genes,
variations.
As you start honing in on certain traits, you're going to start stacking whatever trait that produces those more and more and more, and making your production more consistent to those traits.
Right. So if any breeders listening to this, because it would be a little harder to track out on a ranch, but what records should people be keeping since we can't see like the mitochondrial DNA? Is there any records that people should be keeping internally from when a doe or a buck is born from fawn until they have their own offspring? Like how could they be keeping their records to try to like get ahead of this versus trying to go back and do homework?
Yeah, I mean, I think with DNA is really the greatest tool there. You can study that real easy. But if you're keeping records like on your females, I think it's smart. Chris Timmons was really good at this. I don't know his full formula, but he would create a scoring system. And I'm pretty sure they still, he still consults with Hatata and them, but he has a way of scoring them. But I think you take into consideration, how many fawns do they drop per year, which in whitetail, it's usually twins if they're healthy, but in other species, that's different. Survivability of those offspring, and then you go into production and the animals that they produced, and you can really start grading that. And if you track it and you keep detailed documents of what that is, and so who's doing what, and really kind of tracing. It's other things that you want, fertility and all these things you need to be looking at other than antler traits,
right?
Body composition, all of that. And so I think it's smart to document all of that and get as much data as you possibly can on what those animals do, what they produce. And if putting a scoring system together is really cool to me. I mean, then you could say, okay, I want these different this different data and put numbers to it, and really score your animals. But that's getting really in depth. But I think if you focus on, like I said, survivability and those things, that you can document some of that and you can probably identify who's providing you that. Right.
Well, and I think that's the other part too, is because, again, the more predictable something is, I said earlier, it's worth twice as much. Mm-hmm. And so I think even if someone's buying, even though I know there's not a ton of people getting into the whitetail industry, there's still some. I'm still shocked by how many people I'm hearing getting in. But, I mean, it depends. I'm always a glass half full kind of guy. And then I'm going to put a little, like, bourbon and Coke in there or something.
Yeah,
But, I mean, the less deer breeders there's going to be more of a demand for bred does for certain things. But I think if you're going in to buy and you had those records, and if you said, hey, how many, there's twins and stuff, but when we bought our first deer from our hunting ranch standpoint, we were buying does, I didn't know what twins was.
No.
I didn't know how to ask how many offspring she's had. I didn't know how to ask these questions. And so I think especially if you're going to ask for higher dollar to the layman's person that's just getting in, because they're not going to know who Tasha is. They're not going to know who Heather is. And hopefully they can do their homework. But I think if you just had like layman's term documents to show, well, the reason I'm asking $10,000 for this doe is here's $3 that she's produced, and here's 4 does that she's produced.
Yep.
Well, then out of those does, here's 2-year-olds that she's produced. And so the way that I was always put to me was, when you're selling a doe, the way that they justified the cost of it was, if you can get $2 out of her, you've paid for the doe. And now, again, that means they have to survive to be able to justify it that way. But if you're back then, let's say bucks were $5,000 a piece for easy math. Well, then that doe automatically, by that scoring system, is worth $10,000. Makes sense when you word it that way. And we ended up spending a lot of money with that guy for our ranch, just for ranch release does.
Yeah.
But that's how he justified it. And so I do think having a scoring system, and we even implemented a scoring system in Droptine, is how much does the media department have? But the media department mostly just touches photo, video, and then admin. But like social media management, that touches almost every department of our company. Touches social, admin, photo, video, graphic design. And so like we have a scoring system based on that. So I would encourage the listeners to, whatever that makes sense for you, whatever your goals and objectives are, make a scoring system, because it makes spending money easier to justify, rather than just going, that's a lot of money.
Yep.
It's still a lot of money, but it's an educated decision over just going, yeah, well, here's a blank check. I hope it works.
Yep.
Because then in 6 months, 2 years, 3 years from now, you're going to look up and go, that was either a great investment or a poor investment.
Yeah, no doubt.
So hopefully it makes it a little easier to spend money.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think that the more you can provide on that, the more marketable your animal is. And the Texas market, I mean, it's really, really strong as far as ranch stocking goes. Because like you mentioned, I mean, we're probably down below 400 breeders. And at one time, I think there was 1,600. I know there was 1,200. And so it's the demand is still there. And you think about that, all right, if you're going to make a genetic impact on a piece of property, how can you make a stronger impact than those maternal lines? Because the chain doesn't break, right, until it mutates, which is, I know that's on the questions from Duster, but that's hundreds to thousands of generations, right? And so you have improved the genetic, if you've bred properly,
Right.
You have improved the genetic makeup of that piece of property or that herd within that piece of property for many, many generations.
Right.
And that's why you can now grow trophy whitetail deer on ranches much more efficient than you used to be able to, because you have this genetic knowledge, right? And then you get into survivability. And now Seabury's, to my knowledge, he's working on a breeding value for EHD resistance. And so
praise God, because that's all we need.
Yeah. I mean, imagine that. So you can breed in CWD resistance, you can breed in EHD resistance, and you're just creating a better animal to offer ranches, right?
Right.
Which that improves the value of that property, and that works into the rural economics of the state of Texas and ranching, wildlife ranching more specifically, right?
Well, and I think that's a huge point too, is because again, 2 parts. One, Nash mentioned the same thing, to go back to your breeding, when you said like generations of breeding. Last time he was on, 2 or 3 podcasts ago, he talked about, like, so say there is a complete depop at a ranch or something happens, and he was like, well, most people see it as like, oh, well, you're just money hungry, it's a deer, or it's a bottle baby, emotional ties. He goes, yeah, but it's also intellectual property.
Yeah.
Like that, from a business standpoint, that you worked and put your entire life, that you have hundreds of generations past to get this one pedigree. That's tough.
Oh yeah.
That's tough to lose.
Yep.
And again, when you're buying it, that's a selling point, I think. Hey, when you're buying these embryos, when you're buying the semen, this is intellectual property, because there's not one like it unless you had twins.
Yep.
Or you bred it the exact same way another time. But like, that's a huge selling point going into certain things, which will tie into my points later.
Yep.
But one of the things that we get asked often is, well, hey, you travel around all these places and go to these things. What's your favorite deer that you've seen this year? My personal one is, which one made the most money?
Yeah.
Because I'm a marketing company. The more my people make money, the better that they want to hire us for, and the better we look.
Yep.
But the other side of that is, which one, like on a personal standpoint, that's when I'd go, well, that's a much longer conversation than just the blanket statement. Because I think there's our bucks that look great. I just don't love their pedigree. So yeah, it all comes down to everyone likes, certain goals and objectives, and I think everyone can have that. But yeah, I think the aspect of like the intellectual property on that, whether it's from the mitochondrial DNA, the bottom side, the top side, whatever. But I want to tie that to my question is, how many generations can you go before there's a significant change in mitochondrial DNA? So taking someone that has a poor mitochondrial DNA, and how long of breeding would you think it would take to like have that offspring have a good mitochondrial DNA?
I don't know that it ever would.
Yeah.
I don't know for a fact the answer to that, but I haven't seen, within our time of at least studying whitetail genetics, I haven't seen a decline of a good mitochondria. That's mainly what I've studied, I guess. So I would look at it from that standpoint, like, have I seen one regress? And I don't think I have, but from what I've read, it's hundreds to thousands of generations, before it really mutates or changes. And so, and I'm sure there's cases where that's much quicker, and you really don't know how long that mitochondrial DNA, it's, where does it really go back to, and you think about like wild herds, whether they're in low fence or high fence, they're still socialized and usually territorial, right? And so how tight bred are they? You don't know. I've heard about scenarios where ranches take a native herd and they bring in some outside genetics, and man, the production is just phenomenal. And I've always assumed that's probably hybrid vigor. Like that ranch herd was really tight bred just because of the way nature works in that area, right? And so, bucks and does don't care about DNA. They just care about sharing their offspring. Yeah. And there's probably some really tightness to that. And, but again, when you start thinking about, 70 chromosomes, well, there's a tremendous amount of genetic diversity. I think you can get away with pretty tight animals at times, as long as you're doing it correctly.
Well, and that's what I think too. Like going back to the fallow, there's now, where you can go back 5-6 generations and you can start doing homework. But like, even if you go back to, some of the deer like Hulk, and I'm trying to think, I'm drawing a blank on the other one. But anyways, there's all these deer that came back that have now produced does that at one point were baseline.
Yeah.
But that's where I also think baseline is not all created equal. I think because there's some people who just go catch fallow off a ranch. Well, that's technically baseline. But then there's fallow that's been in pens for 15 years, but they just never been registered. So they are technically baseline. So I think that's just other questions that people need to ask no matter what species you're in. You're going, okay, well, this is baseline, but where did it come from?
Yep.
Have these deer been in pens before?
Are they ranch caught? Are they?
Right. And I think I'll skip part of my thing just to tie into this is at what point do you think that people are taking an uneducated market for people who don't know how to ask these questions or don't know what questions to ask? And some sellers are manipulating like either mitochondrial DNA facts or misleading facts or even genetic facts to an uneducated market. Like at what point do we see that where people are like, well, here's this specific trait. I'll try to be broad at first, but it's like, how are we watching this? So specifically in the axis or fallow industry, people are saying baseline does and they made a quick flip, but it's just not, I think it's misleading. For nearly 60 years, the Exotic Wildlife Association has united ranchers, breeders, conservationists, and the wildlife professionals committed to protecting exotic wildlife and preserving the exotic wildlife industry. EWA membership gives you a strong voice in legislative advocacy, valuable industry connections, educational resources, and access to programs that support wildlife conservation and responsible stewardship. Join a community dedicated to the future of the exotic wildlife. Learn more and become a member today at myewa.org. As summer approaches, deer are starting to grow out their antlers. So if you are looking to promote any of your antlered species animals, make sure you give Droptine Studios a call for all your media and marketing needs.
Yeah. There's a lot to that. I think that it's up to you to do your homework ultimately, right? But I do think like Lance Clausen and those guys have done a good job of trying to educate that industry,
right?
Because you have to have the understanding of if there's total failure or not total failure, but a high percentage of failure within your industry, that's not a recipe for a long, successful industry, right?
Right.
And people have to win across the board.
Yeah.
They just do. And majority of us, there's a big part of it that's a wealthy man's hobby, but a lot of us we're dependent on that income. That's how we ranch, right? And so, like Lance, I've seen where he's done some talks on anchor does, and I don't know if they broke it down to exact mitochondrial DNA, but I've seen where he's done a good job of trying to educate those guys, I think. And just from an outsider, I don't see a ton of it, but I know I've seen the effort, right? And I think that's smart. I think it's smart to educate them. And like you're doing, you're saying, okay, you need to ask these questions, like write them down,
right? And
get your list and make your decisions off of that. Once you do that, like if you identify your traits and you go into an auction, you'll figure out real quick, man, I'm only interested in 2 lots, because you're so defined, right? If you go in there blindly, I've done it myself. I've seen, it's a very exciting environment. You might start just buying stuff, and so it's really smart to be strategic, and it makes your decisions much more simple.
Right.
And whether it's a baseline or a well-defined pedigree, I think you need to do that research, right? Like you said, identify, is it ranch caught? Because you don't know. It may be the best mitochondrial line in the world. It's just undefined.
Right.
We don't know, right? And so, but know what you're doing and what your budget allows and what your goal is, right? Like set your goals. And if it comes out of a program that hasn't DNA'd for years, there's several of those in the access industry. There's some guys that been breeding them much longer than I ever thought, that never really marketed them or I didn't know about them, but they've done a good job. Like Jordan Smirker was one of them.
Yeah.
was, I think at one point had a pasture and was just putting really big bucks in there and ended up moving them into pens and stuff and much longer than I've been doing it. And, there's value to that, right?
Yeah.
Like, at least to me, if I'm buying, like I can't identify any maternal lines at this point,
Right.
But if there's generations of good trait breeding above that maternal line, then I'm better off than me going and grabbing some ranch does. But
Right.
even at that aspect, you say, okay, well, what ranch did it come off of? Is there great production on that ranch? Because, like some of the breeder bucks that I have came off a specific ranch, right?
Yeah.
Like I would love to have females out of that. And it's just there's not a lot of definition there, but you're making the best educated decision you can make with what's available.
Right.
Right.
Well, and I think too, like going into the axis part of it is when you're doing that, we'll say picture perfect ranch, just because it's not real. It's just there.
Yeah.
So if all these axes came off picture perfect, well, everything, since it's so new and people are trying to find that maternal line, because there's so many, like Aggie, I wish I had Aggie's mom. Will we ever find her?
No.
Probably not.
No.
And so like, if we're able to see that, but I mean, I even know guys that went in and they're like, this buck came off this ranch. Name a price. I want every axis doe off this place.
Yeah.
Now they're probably going to resell them later, but they're going to DNA them first.
Yeah.
And so they're going to put them in and go, hey, I want to make sure if any of these pop, even if it's two back, I don't know how all that works on such a new pedigree system, but if they're like, I want to see all of this offspring that I can, because if there's one doe in there that adds two lineages onto my axis buck, worth that much more.
Yeah.
And then you want to keep those and then find out who their mamas were or offspring is. And so,
start mapping that. Yeah.
I was going to say, and that's where I wanted to see as far as like, now we've got black buck. Fallow's pretty predominant now. Axis is getting there. And I've heard rumor of like Impala, Nyala. They've got Sable now. Bongo may be one. Kudu's one. And so how far back do you think a pedigree has to go to be able to predict mitochondrial DNA in the exotics?
It's going to be a ways, to really be able to predict it. But I think the first step is, like you're saying, like, I'm selling doe. It's a natural progression of a breeding program, like my baseline does. Well, once I have offspring, what I try to do, just a trade tool, is maybe not sell that doe unless I have a daughter. That way I can preserve that mitochondrial line. Sometimes you can't do that, though. I mean, it's a business, right? Yeah. And so, but I may be 4 years down the road saying, hey, is that doe still alive? I'd sure like to buy her back, and that happened a lot. That happened a lot in the whitetail industry, in pen-to-pen scenarios. And so, I think it's all relative, right? Like, you're going to start out at the beginning. If there's one big buck that we produce, like this great big 3-year-old, I'm going to know who his mama is, and I'm going to know where she is, whether she's in my pens or another place. Right. And I'm going to know if I have any daughters out of her or sisters to him or whatever, or half sisters, and so that's where it starts. But then, man, there's 2, 3, 4, the granddaughter produced this one, as you can define that more, the more significant it is. Right. And at some point, that's what you have to build your line off of. Right. That's what's so intriguing about the axis breeding to me, is because we're going to, you have the opportunity to create one of the base lines, essentially, because we essentially started wild caught. Right. And studying whitetail for a really long time, that's really cool to me, because you study those old lines, and like Kutzer and Gonzalez, and then you saw the Birdalls take both lines and cross them to each other, and it's just really intriguing how well some of it worked. But being one of those base lines is intriguing to me. That's right. That's something that, as far as professional goals, that's cool. Like if you could produce one of the best axis lines ever, that's intriguing to me. Right. That's kind of a pinnacle of what we do. And same way with bass or whatever we're breeding. But I think that's really cool. And I think that, like with axis, they're really popular, right? Like we had to turn people down this year on bred does. And it was all ranch improvement almost. ranch stocking, but there was a heck of a demand or want to improve axis genetics on properties, which is obviously I'm very passionate about that. I think that's really neat. I think it improves the property value and everything. And so it's neat to see that. But you think down the road, like, man, if you produced, a pen full of 34 to 40 inch winter bucks, how cool would that be? With long caudals, or as you get further along the line, that is really neat to me, right?
Yeah,
I think that's a beautiful picture in my mind.
Well, I'm excited to see it because I'm hoping that 10, 15, 20 years from now, someone's going, man, I've got the Methner genetics on axis, and I've got all this, and you're able to like look back at it because of the work you're doing now.
Yep.
And because even when you say wild caught, I mean, that's how whitetail started.
Yeah.
And so, like, it had to get to the point to where you could track DNA, track your breeding, and be able to get to the point where you can produce giant 200-inch deer.
That's right.
So I'm really interested to see when we can have our first 40-inch pin-raised axis. And then, God, how much is that mom going to be worth?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, six figures?
Who knows?
Plus?
Yeah, it just depends on what that breeding market looks like.
Yeah.
Like from what I've seen, they're a little more difficult to breed than most species, and so there's the breeder market's not huge. It's not bad, but it's not huge. But the ranch stocking market certainly is, and
absolutely,
and there is a great desire to improve those genetics. They're very, people love them. I mean, I feel like they're right under a whitetail as far as popularity goes.
Yep.
And you start producing big, like you said, 38, 40. I mean, what's the limit? I mean, a pasture full of 40+ inch bucks. That would just be unbelievable.
Yeah.
People would, I think you're right. Even in a ranch scenario, people would pay a premium to have those. I would. I mean, if I bought a piece of property, that's the kind of genetics I would want it.
Yeah.
Even if you only started with 5 or whatever, I would reduce my numbers greatly to have the quality.
Right.
Well,
and I think too, being able to look back and like not know how many, because in 10 years ago, I would have said axis breeding, just put them out in the pasture.
Yeah.
Or same thing with black buck, fallow. Just those are pasture animals. Those are commons. What are you doing?
Yeah.
But we don't know what the future holds either. But I think just in general, the more value you give something, it will survive. It will produce. It will get more buyers interested. But there will always, always, always be the people who go, I don't want to put axis in pins because it's too much of a hassle.
Yeah.
But there will always be the ranch guy that goes, I don't want to do that, but I'll buy your doe for 3 times the cost because she's already guaranteed bred to that buck.
Yeah. Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, that's okay with me. I mean, to go through we have the knowledge, and we've been doing it for years, over 20 years, breeding animals. I started with whitetail, but we learned so much in how to design things and how to create a working facility that works and all those things that, you can translate over to axis pretty easy.
Right.
But that's not for everybody, and it doesn't need to be.
Right.
It doesn't. You don't need a completely saturated breeder market, in my opinion, but the ranch market is there, and I think it'll be there forever. And that's that's kind of the bread and butter, right? And that's where my passion is, anyways, is to improving properties, genetically, and ultimately, my goal would be, the properties, the ranches I develop, that's my end goal, is to develop wildlife ranches, right? But I'm going to use, my goal or thought process is I'm going to use my axis genetics, and I'm going to use my fish genetics and what I know on whitetail, and be able to hopefully brand a piece of property that very few could put together, because we spent a career studying these things, right? And even all the way down to the habitat of a ranch, but creating a wildlife ranch that almost nobody else could create genetically and nutritionally and habitat wise, the whole 9 yards, and that's something that hopefully that's what I'll be doing, soon.
Well, and I think that'd be super prideful. I mean, it's already really humbling to look back and talk about some of the properties that you've been, the wildlife biologist, the manager, the go-to guy on a property, and to see the offspring, to see the bucks that are being produced and harvested years later.
Yeah.
It's really rewarding to see. So I couldn't imagine if you were like, now either buying the property, starting from scratch, and then forward jumping this person that's going to invest in this land 10, 15 years just because you were the person that helped them from the jump.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's laid out exactly like we want to do it. And then genetically, if we're doing our job properly, you have some of the best animal genetics in the world, and you have some of the best fish genetics in the world. Yep. And so the sky's the limit for this. And not very many other people have that, right? And so that to me is very intriguing.
Yeah. So I think this is kind of the part where we put some questions out on Facebook. I don't know if this is all from here. I kind of had my questions jumbled together, but one of the ones was, when people hear the word DNA, they sometimes treat it like an absolute smoking gun. Is mitochondrial DNA really that black and white, or is there still a lot of interpretation involved?
As far as a breeding strategy goes, to me, it is that black and white. It is very, very definitive. It's easy to see if there's enough proof,
right?
Offspring, those things. Genetic data, then number of offspring to be able to judge it, right?
Right.
But it is incredibly definitive in the whitetail industry, which is what where I originally learned about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, genetics are genetics. Yeah. I think whitetail's just proven.
Yeah, that's right. It's easier to read, right? Because there's so much there.
Yeah.
So yes, I think it's about as close to black and white as you can get.
I think.
Now, I mean, there is a caveat to that, right? Like, you have these very, very strong maternal lines, and there's probably some there's mediocre and less strong. And trying to define that, that's not so black and white. Right. But the ones that are very strong, it is about as close to black and white as you can get it, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Can people cherry pick mitochondrial DNA findings to push a certain story or agenda or perceived value that may not actually be fully supported? I think that may be kind of what I asked earlier about having an uneducated audience. Yeah. That's kind of how I read that, because I kind of already asked that question as far as I'm only going to tell you this part of the story because you don't know what else to ask. So I'm technically not lying to you.
Yeah.
But don't ask me these questions.
Well, I think, DNA, I mean, it's not 100% correct, as far as DNA samples go, but it's pretty accurate. And so that's one way where that cuts a lot of the BS out, right? And then I guess the second way I would try to answer that or mend that is, know who you're dealing with. Ask. Is this you know as well as I do, buddy? It's a small industry, whether it's exotics or whitetail or fish or whatever. The wildlife industry is wildlife ranching industry is you're going to get some strong opinions, but get those Yelp reviews, and you can make a decision. And then I think it's important to go visit and sit down with people and visit. I mean, you can tell a lot by talking man to man or woman to woman or whatever. I mean, having a real talk face to face, and do that with multiple people. If you're shopping axis, go to all the axis breeders or as many as you can go to. And try to define that. And that's one way. But DNA, like I said, it doesn't really lie.
Yeah. So, and then how much do politics, regulations, or personal agendas affect how people interpret mitochondrial DNA results?
I don't know. I mean, I think there's a lot of people that understand mitochondrial DNA, but again, if it's DNA, you can't fudge it. It certainly. There's people that market better than others, right? And there's politics and everything. But nowadays with social media, if you produce, then you're good.
Yeah, people are going to know.
Yeah. You produce it, have Droptine Studios film it, put it on social media, and I'm telling you, people are going to know, and so your goal always should be production. right? Not playing politics, not doing these things, but producing the very best you can possibly produce. And I don't think you can go wrong with that. If you're producing, there's no denying your program.
Right.
That's my opinion.
Absolutely. All right. We're getting close to the end, but what other information should be considered alongside mitochondrial DNA before making a major breeding, conservation, or regulatory decision?
Well, so breeding decisions, again, above the way I view it, which is, just kind of a redneck view of it, but I'll look at the very bottom line of that pedigree to understand the mitochondrial line. Then when I start looking above that, I'm looking at traits and line breeding too, but it's trait breeding and line breeding above that bottom line. And so does that pedigree consist all the way to the top, the traits that I want? And that goes all the way from survivability to 14 SG2s or whatever, and so like I said, I list about 15 traits out that I really try to hone in on no matter what niche I'm chasing. But above that bottom line, it's about trait breeding to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, I wish, I've had this thought as we've been talking, each part about the breeding side of it is, I wish there was an AI program, and maybe I'm going to give someone $1 million idea.
Yeah.
But also people don't put in everything some breeders don't even register every animal they have, much less take measures to every buck they have or whatever.
Right.
But it would be really cool, and it probably will happen one day.
Yep.
I just don't got the time or money to do it. But to be like, I want every picture, every score sheet, everything that every doe that has ever produced has produced. And then you can type in, it's like, I want 14-inch chew or G2s, 30-inch width, and 12-inch brow tines, and be like, you need this line.
Yeah, that would be really cool. This matchup is what's going to give you the best odds of creating that. Yeah,
that'd be.
It's probably doable. It's above my knowledge, but that would be cool.
And then just on that other part which I think conservation kind of goes into the breeding. Breeding is conservation, in my opinion. But what about
that goes to not just chasing antler traits. True conservation is bringing in those things like survivability, where you are effectively improving genetic makeups of ranches for generations.
Right.
You know what I mean? That's a big part of it, and the breeding industry has to understand that. It's a ranching industry and there's fiduciary responsibilities, but there's conservation as well, and there's no greater management tool available to ranch owners, in my opinion, than improved genetics. And it's been proven time and time again. And many people, myself as well, can show you how it's been proven. Yeah. And it works. It also works in fish, like Texas Parks and Wildlife doing the Share Lunker program with bass. I mean, they're selectively breeding for trophy genetics, right? To the point where they've identified common genetic markers in trophy bass. Well, it's been probably, in my opinion, one of their most successful programs.
Really?
Yeah.
So how do you, I had this on here, but I don't know if I read it, but when you're breeding fish, and I know last time we talked about it, like you can't really see because they're underwater. Now you can control what ponds or things they go into. How are you controlling the mitochondrial DNA breeding in fish?
Yeah, you're really not. I mean, so all of my brood stock derived from 13-pound plus female. That's my just
point
control.
blank.
Yeah, there's no DNA.
Period.
I mean, there's no pedigree to say these. But now I have data, and here in the future, I think
you took your own notes.
Yeah. So, and I pair them. I mean, the fish themselves for different reasons, but I know who bred who in most scenarios, and so. But a big part of that for me, a lot of fish farmers. A really, really big female may not be the most productive egg-wise or reproductive-wise, but understanding how important mitochondrial DNA is in breeding strategies, that was one of my must, right? Like I have to know that this female line at least got to this size. And I don't think, I don't know. I mean, I hate to speak for others, but I don't know that a lot of fish breeders look at it that way. I had a long conversation with a guy out of Georgia that he probably has the best lake in the nation. And, he's produced just absolute monsters. And it turned out the original stock was supposed to be 100% Florida genetics. That's kind of the standard in largemouth bass. Florida genetics over the length of a lifetime generally get bigger, right? So, and so a lot of trophy bass scenarios, everybody wants 100%. Well, these fish, when he tested them, came back and they had a percentage of northern in them. And these suckers, they got huge. I mean, to my knowledge, probably produced the largest private waters bass there is. And it's possible that fish wasn't 100% Florida. And he was asking me, should he breed that fish, because he was worried because it wasn't, and he was being, there was some other takes on it, I guess, that were really wanting him to say, no, don't breed her, because she's well, it's not definitive that she's not, but it's possible that she's not 100% Florida. I'm like, I don't care. If she got that big, you breed her. You know that mitochondrial line produced one of the largest fish in the nation. That is a brood stock. You can continually breed in Florida genetics to increase that percentage, but you have, or you don't know, but it's as far as it's definitive as well as it can be, that you have a very strong maternal line on this female, you know? And so that's what I was trying to explain to him. Like, yes, I don't care.
Big is big.
Yeah, that's right. That's defined.
Well, you know what that reminds me of in the whitetail breeding? The Texas genetic guys.
Yeah.
Because they're like, I'm not going to touch it unless it's 15 16ths or whatever.
Yep.
But also I look at it and go, well, 15 16ths means there's some northern in it.
Oh, yeah.
Like you love that deer and you call it pure Texas, even though it's not fully pure. Somehow, some way through that pedigree, it was manipulated by northern genetics that you hate.
Yeah.
But that beautiful deer that you're promoting. And so it's the same deal. It's like, now, I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm not saying it's right. Yeah. I'm just saying you can be a purist. You can be whatever you want. But to a point, I still go back to what Macy said, is he's like, do you like that deer? Yes. Then don't kill that deer and let it breed.
That's right.
It's your place.
That's simple.
You can do it. But don't shit on people for liking other lines that breed. So same deal.
Yeah.
I don't know that guy. I don't know fish.
Yeah.
I barely know deer. But to be able to look at it and go, that's a huge fish. I want to breed it probably regardless.
Yeah. It's a female.
Yeah.
Well, I know it has that, it more than likely has a really strong mitochondrial line, Yeah. So, yeah, I agree. I mean, in Texas genetic, that's a niche, right? Like, that's a very valid niche. And generally, there's a lot of survivability to that. Like, it's a great niche. You're right. But it's okay if you want to have a quarter northern, and that's going to bring in some different traits. And it's okay if you want 100% Texas. I get it, man.
Right.
That's really cool, first off, right?
Yeah.
In my mind, that's a neat thing to have. And there's a lot of really good traits that go with that, but like you said, it's let people, make your,
be proud of what you're doing, but don't shit on others for what they're doing.
Yeah, no doubt. And it's okay to be unique, right? Like it's almost necessary, in some form. I mean, you can't be like everybody else in an industry. Like, it's okay to try something that you think absolutely is going to work that maybe not everybody likes, because oftentimes if it works, you're sitting on something much more valuable, right? That nobody else has. And so it's okay to be unique. It's okay to make unique breeding decisions. You make, as long as they're educated, do it, man. Don't worry about following the crowd. Do what you think's best, because it all comes down to production.
Right.
Go get some pictures, put it on social media, and you can prove it.
Right. Seeing that, the part about being unique, and I don't know, because I do not know these people's lines. I just, from what I've heard in conversations, but it's like CC Bar. I've heard that they're a great outcross to a lot of the industry, and they happen to just be phenomenal at GEBVs. Yeah.
Well, he started years ago, way before.
That's incredible.
When the Northern guys were starting it. And that's another line that's incredibly hardy. You got a survival rate that's incredibly high. And he's another person that is, Hank is, just a wonderful, wonderful human being. Yeah. And he has a really good line of deer that produces really good, and it is very, very hardy. And he was really smart He did it. You're exactly right. He did it before it was cool, right? Like he jumped in it, and now look, he's leading. He probably, to my knowledge, has the best GBV average in the nation. I bet you.
Right.
And I don't know. I doubt he has any GGs.
One of his banners at the show said like 75% of my herd, or 8 more, 90, whatever it is SS.
Yeah.
And so that's
cool.
Great feature.
Yeah. What a great thing for a great person. I mean, that is a perfect example of being unique.
Right.
It paid off for him.
Absolutely.
And he's one of those guys that he's going to do what he thinks right. And he did. And I'm very happy for him.
Yeah. Praise God, it worked out for him.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Great example. Yep.
And then one of the other ones I was asked, and I have no idea about any of this, but it said, would cloning an animal result in different mitochondrial DNA if the egg donor is different from the animal being cloned?
Yes. If the egg cell came from a different animal, a recipient, you're going to get the mitochondrial DNA from the egg cell.
Really?
Yeah.
Man.
So I don't know this in depth, but the way I understand it is if you're cloning the donor, you're pulling the nucleus out of the cell.
Right.
And you're implanting it into an egg cell donor. And the mitochondrial is going to be in the egg cell donor. Now, I think you can take and grab both from the donor. I think you can utilize egg cells from a specific female and a nucleus from a specific female and maintain that mitochondrial DNA. But I don't think that's the norm.
I was going to say, that's a whole lot of work just for being able to go, this does good, I'm a breeder.
Versus that's taking it further than I ever have. Yeah.
There's plenty of good whitetail out
there. Yeah. That's getting after it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think this is the last one we have, and then I just had some closing questions is, what is one simple thing breeders or ranch owners can start doing today to pay more attention to mitochondrial DNA? Protect your investment, preserve your records, promote responsible wildlife management. The Exotic Wildlife Association Animal Registry is working in conjunction with the Veterinary Genetics Lab at UC Davis. This provides secure, professional record keeping for the exotic wildlife owners and breeders across the country. From documenting pedigrees to ownership to promoting herd management and conservation goals, the EWA Registry is a trusted resource for our industry. Whether you own one animal or manage an entire ranch, the EWA Animal Registry is here to help. Learn more today at myewa.org. That's myewa.org. Spring Creek Outdoors is an all-inclusive habitat and wildlife management company that works with landowners in every ecoregion of Texas. Their biologists have over 55 years of combined experience improving the furred, feathered, and finned resources that have you driving to the ranch each weekend. Macy Ledbetter and the team at Spring Creek Outdoors will save you time, money, and gray hair, and they will help your property maximize its full potential. They may be found on Facebook and on the gram or at springcreekoutdoors.com.
What is one thing that breeders and ranch owners can do to pay more attention to mitochondrial DNA?
Listen to this podcast.
Yeah, we went over it pretty. Like I said, DNA doesn't lie, and in researching it, and the example I use, like if I'm breaking down your herd, I'm going to look at all your breeder bucks, and I'm going to try to find common mitochondrial maternal lines, the bottom line of that pedigree that are common in those breeders.
Right.
And if I can define that, if say you have 20 just phenomenal bucks and 7 of them go back to this specific maternal line and 4 of them go back to this specific maternal line, and, and on it, that's kind of how I judge it. Or I've often thought, like, my wife loves horses, right? And I don't know anything about horse breeding, and I know it's very well defined, but I know she has a passion for breeding and training horses. And so if we ever got into that, the first thing I would have to do, like, I would be going into this blindly, like a newcomer coming into our industry, right?
Right.
Or the industry where, not our industry, but I've thought about this over and over. How do I get as well versed as possible? And I think the very first thing I do would go to the top breeders and define what makes the best animal in their herd, right? Or animals. What traits make the best animal in their herd, and try to define all of that, right? And then once I have a good understanding of what's the best, then I can go find those animals and start tracking the maternal lines that produce those animals. And that's where I would start building my female line, at least.
Right.
And so that's just kind of how my brain works. And if I'm going into something blindly, that's how I would do it. Or if I am dissecting a line because I have to create a breeding strategy out of it, and I don't know that line, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go find the best, and I'm going to find what's common in them, or what I think's the best. Everybody has a different definition of that, but it's all going to go back to my traits and maternal lines.
Yeah. So because that's what I've heard the Refuge did, is they had a whole book on horse breeding and line breeding in the horse industry, and they just moved it over to whitetail. Yeah. Now I don't know what book it was or what lineage things they looked at.
Yeah, I think it's all really well documented in the horse, like I think the racehorse industry, and they were really sharp at breeding animals too, and that Richard Miller, the guy I mentioned earlier that kind of explained mitochondrial DNA to me, he knew that line and the Birdall line better than anybody I ever knew. I think he ended up teaching McSpadden them some of the stuff about their own line. I mean, he just knew it, man, and he had studied it and understood maternal lines. And so that's another line of deer that is really good. Mr. Melanson has it now, and it is a very, very good line of deer, very productive, and I think at this point it's pretty dang hardy. Yeah,
Well, when we had Leo Martinez on here, I want to say Leo. It was he was talking about Lance or Birdall. He would ask a question. He's like, "Hold on, let me go to my truck," and he brought back a tube. Yeah. And he pulled it out, and it was a pedigree, but it didn't stop. He tracked and hand wrote everything for like 10 or 12 generations past what Nadar would show.
Yeah, wow.
And so then he was like, I was looking at this paper, and he's like, it's as long as this table, and we're just looking at it. And he goes, all right, well, I want to go do homework on this doe now because it was, 10 generations past. And so that's what Leo did, is he was like, I'm going to go back and find, and I think he made a breeder buck out of it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, do you remember the buck Toxic? Mm-hmm. Davin and them had him.
Yeah.
It was probably the biggest yearling. As far as with good traits I've ever seen.
Yearling.
Yeah. And so we're looking at that pedigree, and the bottom side went to a certain point and it stopped. And Grant had the old notes that weren't in DNA off of either Birdall or Woodard, and eventually we figured out it went to Pink 22, that doe that I told you is one of the strongest maternal lines in the nation. It went to her on the notes. And so Grant was able to match it DNA wise and get it on the DNA paper. So he said, okay, if this is, the dam, and somehow he was able to prove DNA wise that actually went to the anchor, but it was off of really old notes, good data, and another giant breeder that it just made complete sense. Like, I see why this deer is what he is. All these traits above him, but he has this incredibly strong maternal line, which, like we've talked about, that fuels cellular growth. Yeah. So pretty cool.
Well, man, that makes sense. Hopefully people will hear all this and kind of start piecing their own puzzles together. Like you said, or what I'll say is, we're just doing this trying to start conversations for people.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to the podcast, if we answered your questions or not, comment below. And I literally mean it. Don't message me on Facebook. Don't text me. Comment on here. Don't be ashamed, because even the 8 questions that I had, people were like, I don't want to comment on Facebook, but here's my question. Yeah. Just be proud of it. Yeah. Because being on a podcast, it's kind of hard being put on the spot.
Yeah.
But at least we've got the chest hair to sit up here and be on camera and say what we know and don't know.
Yeah.
I was trying to be a little more PG versus what I wanted to say, but I think it's just be open and honest, and no one's going to think less of you because they probably have the same question.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But it also helps my analytics if you comment on it.
Yeah. That's the key is to never stop learning. You know, that's the whole point.
Absolutely.
If you want to be one of the best, in my opinion, you have to continually want to get better, and you have to want to learn.
Yeah.
And you'll never know everything.
Yeah, thank God, because I enjoyed doing this.
Yeah, me too. It's been great.
Yeah. And so a couple of closing things, which if they don't figure it out by now, hopefully they can listen to this and hammer it into their head one last time. But if someone only remembers one thing from this conversation, what should it be?
I I think to effectively map maternal lines, you know, in your breeding strategy.
And then how should understanding mitochondrial DNA change the way people think about long-term breeding?
It should. Well, if you're not using it as a focal point, you should. Like I said, the first thing I look at in a pedigree is going to be that bottom line. Especially if I'm looking at females. And if I'm announcing lots in an auction, I am absolutely, if there is a strong maternal line there, I'm making that known. Yeah. I think it's that important.
Well, you got anything else you think we missed?
No, I think it's been great, man. I really appreciate you letting me come in.
Well, I know you're a busy man, and I appreciate you taking the time to come in and be in person because it's a feat, and we don't live too close to each other. So
it's been great. I really appreciate it, man.
We added a new section at the end of all of our podcasts now, and I think the first one may have just gone out, but what I'm doing now is I am having the guest who is before you, without knowing who you are, leave a question for you, and they don't know who you are.
Right.
So we've had everything from breeding, from very deep theological questions to the question you're going to get today. So the question for you is, if you had your last meal before like death row or something, what would your last meal be?
Oh gosh, I'm a foodie.
It's going to have crawfish in there somewhere.
Yeah,
no, I'm just kidding.
it might be crawfish. It would either be, it would probably be crawfish.
Really?
Or blue crab.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. If I was going out.
Like 30 pounds of.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It would, I would gorge on crawfish.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So then now my question for you would be, not knowing who our next guest is.
Oh my gosh.
It can be serious. It can be silly like that one. It can be whatever. But if you could leave a question for our next guest, what would you want to ask him?
Watch the next episode to find out his question.
That's my question.
Got it. I love it.
Yeah. That's my question.
I love it. We'll ask him. So if you're listening to the podcast, like I said, please like, share, subscribe, comment, tell us how pretty Chris looks or something in the comments. Yeah. But Chris, thank you again for coming in. Thank you for sharing the wisdom that God's given you, and tell them where they can find you. We'll let people reach out to you if they have questions.
Oh yeah. I own Blessed Bayou Fishery. Well, there's a few sub businesses of it, but Blessed Bayou. And so you can look us up at www.blessedbayou.com.
Wonderful. Well, Chris, thank you for being here, and let's go get some lunch.
Yeah. Sounds great, man. Thank you.
Thank you.